A king rotting away from smallpox. A queen beheaded amidst a jeering crowd. A prince dead at just 10 years old. These are not mere tragedies. They are a curse. The curse of the Bourbons. In the dark veil of European history, there exists a dynasty that once shined like the sun, but withered in blood-soaked tragedies and mysteries. The House of Bourbon, the kings, queens, and princes of France, wrote pages of glorious history, but also ones steeped in horror. From the opulent palaces of Versailles to the blood-drenched squares of the French Revolution, their fate seems bound by an inescapable curse. A king dies in agony, his body decaying from smallpox. A queen, cursed by the masses, loses her head to the guillotine. An innocent prince fades away in a dank prison cell before reaching adulthood. These deaths are not just tragedies. They are the marks of a terrifying curse. Imagine 18th century France, where the golden glow of the court mingles with the cries of the starving poor. Louis XIV, the Sun King, once made all of Europe bow before his splendor and power. But that radiance dimmed as his successors faced gruesome fates. Louis XV, once beloved, died in disgust as he turned into a reeking corpse, forcing even his courtiers to flee. People whispered that this was a warning, the first sign of a curse awakening. Was it mere coincidence, or truly a punishment from supernatural forces? Then came Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the doomed royal couple. They entered history as symbols of extravagance, but ended in blood and tears. The guillotine's cold blade in the heart of Paris not only took their lives, but etched into the people's minds a belief: the Bourbons were cursed. Their son, Louis XVII, an innocent child, perished in a prison cell at age 10, leaving haunting questions. Was their fate sealed long ago? Were the strange deaths, assassinations, and bizarre accidents of this dynasty the result of a vow of vengeance from the past? Join us in this tale where history intertwines with legend, where truth mingles with unsolved mysteries. The curse of the Bourbons. Is it the consequence of their opulence and debauchery, or a true curse from dark forces? Prepare to explore, but beware, for that curse, perhaps, has not yet ended.
Part 2. The House of Bourbon, a Glorious Dynasty and the Shadow of the Curse. Continuing the haunting tale of the curse of the Bourbons, we delve deeper into the history of a royal dynasty that once dominated France and left an indelible mark on Europe. From the dazzling splendor of Louis XIV, the Sun King, to the blood-soaked tragedies of later generations, the House of Bourbon is not only a symbol of power, but also a testament to the fragility of glory in the face of cruel fate. The introduction painted a chilling picture: gruesome deaths, tragic destinies, and unsolved mysteries. To understand why this curse clung to the dynasty, we must journey back in time, exploring their rise, their zenith, and the seeds of tragedy sown long ago. The majestic beginnings of the Bourbons. The House of Bourbon, one of Europe's most powerful dynasties, traces its origins to the 13th century when Robert de Clermont, the sixth son of King Louis IX of France, married the heiress of Bourbon. From a minor branch of the Capetian dynasty, the Bourbons gradually rose through strategic marriages and political acumen. By the 16th century, they had become a formidable force. The pivotal moment came in 1589, when Henri IV, a member of the Bourbon and Dome branch, ascended the French throne after a series of brutal religious wars between Catholics and Protestants. Henri IV, known as Henri the Great, is one of France's most beloved monarchs. Born a Protestant, he converted to Catholicism. to secure his claim to the throne, famously declaring, "Paris is worth a mass." His tolerance was exemplified by the Edict of Nantes in 1598, granting religious freedom to Protestants and ending decades of civil war. Henri IV brought stability, economic growth, and administrative reforms, strengthening France's position in Europe. Yet even in this era, shadows crept in. In 1610, Henri IV was assassinated by François Ravaillac, a Catholic fanatic on the streets of Paris. This sudden death, though no one now tied to a curse, sparked unease in the court and among the people. The great king left the throne to his young son, Louis XIII, and a kingdom rife with instability. Henri IV's assassination marked the first time a Bourbon king met a tragic end. Though no one spoke of a curse at the time, this event laid the groundwork for the mysterious tales that would envelop the dynasty. His successors would face increasingly daunting challenges, and the shadow of tragedy began to loom over the House of Bourbon. Louis XIII and the foundation of absolute power. Louis XIII inherited the throne in a France still divided by religious and noble conflicts. His reign was marked by the dominance of Cardinal Richelieu, a shrewd strategist who centralized royal power, weakened feudal lords, and elevated France's status in Europe. Richelieu's leadership saw France's involvement in the 30 Years' War, cementing its role as a great power. However, Louis XIII was not widely beloved. Often overshadowed by his advisors, he faced personal struggles, including a strained relationship with his mother, Marie de Medici, and rumors about his private life. Louis XIII died from illness in 1643, leaving the throne to his son, Louis XIV, who was only 4 years old. While his reign was not marked by overt tragedies, Louis XIII's policies deepened the rift between the monarchy and the people. Centralizing power in the king's hands, though stabilizing in the short term, sowed seeds of long-term discontent, especially as taxes and wars drained the populace. The court's extravagance, contrasted with the poverty of the masses, began to foster resentment. Louis XV's death was a pivotal moment that cemented belief in a curse. Stricken with smallpox, a common but devastating disease, his body was ravaged in his final days. His skin blistered and rotted, emitting a stench so foul that even loyal courtiers fled. This gruesome death horrified the nation and was seen as a divine warning. The people, already resentful of the court's excesses, whispered that this was the first clear sign of a curse unfolding. Some linked it to ancient curses from executed witches or the bitter oaths of oppressed peasants. Historical context and belief in the curse. To understand why the notion of a curse gained traction, we must consider the historical and cultural context of 18th century France. While science and reason were emerging, belief in magic, curses, and divine retribution remained strong. Tales of witches, vengeful oaths, and the wrath of the poor were common in folklore. The Bourbons, with their lavish lifestyle and detachment from the masses, were perfect targets for such stories. Each royal death in unusual circumstances fueled the belief that an unseen force was at work. Moreover, the Bourbons' tragedies reflected the decline of the French feudal system. Social inequalities, famines, and endless wars eroded trust in the monarchy. Louis XV's death, with its horror, symbolized the rot of the entire regime. Curse stories were not just explanations for tragedy, but expressions of the people's anger and powerlessness against royal authority. Legacy and seeds of further tragedy. Louis XV's death marked a turning point for the Bourbons. The throne passed to his grandson, Louis XVI, a young and unprepared king. Little did anyone know that Louis XV's reign would witness even darker tragedies, pushing the dynasty to the brink of extinction. But before we delve into the tale of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the doomed figures of the French Revolution, we must recognize the signs of the curse that emerged under Louis XV. Not only his death, but also scandals, sudden losses of royals, and France's declining global influence hinted at a looming reckoning. One notable tale involves Madame de Pompadour, Louis XV's famed mistress. Rumored to have been cursed by political enemies, her death in 1664 from illness sparked whispers of black magic. Though not a Bourbon by blood, her demise added to the ominous atmosphere surrounding the court. Such stories, whether true or not, fueled the sense of a dynasty under siege by dark forces. Connecting to the curse. Returning to the curse introduced earlier, we see it as more than a mystical tale. It reflects deep social conflicts in France. The Bourbons, with their opulence and power, built their dynasty on the blood and tears of the masses. The tragic deaths from Louis XV to later generations may be seen as consequences of oppressive policies and moral decay. Yet for the people of the time, they were proof of a curse, an inevitable punishment. The next chapter will take us to the darkest period of the Bourbons, the reign of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, when the guillotine became a symbol of rage and the curse seemed to reach its peak. Was this truly the work of a mystical curse, or merely the price of a dynasty's mistakes? Continue the journey to uncover the truth.
Part 3. The gruesome death of Louis XV and the curse begins. Continuing our exploration of the tragic history of the House of Bourbon, from Part 2, we witnessed the rise and peak of this dynasty, from Henri IV to the Sun King Louis XIV, followed by the gradual decline under Louis XV. Seeds of discontent were sown among the people, mingling with rumors of a mysterious curse haunting the royal lineage. The deaths of royals, from Henri IV's assassination to the successive losses in Louis XIV's family, raised questions about the dynasty's cruel fate. But it was Louis XV's horrifying death in 1774 that transformed whispers into a fervent belief the curse was not just a legend, but a chilling reality. This part plunges us into one of the darkest chapters of the Bourbons, where smallpox, court decadence, and supernatural omens converged to paint a grim picture of a dynasty's destiny. The reign of Louis XV, decline amid extravagance. As noted in Part 2, Louis XV ascended the throne in 1715, at age 5, carrying hopes of continuing Louis XIV's glory. However, as he matured, he failed to meet those expectations. An intelligent but indecisive king, he was influenced by advisors and powerful mistresses like Madame de Pompadour and Madame du Barry. His nearly 60-year reign was marked by economic decline, military failures, and a growing divide between the monarchy and the people. France, under Louis XV, faced costly wars, such as the War of the Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748, and the Seven Years' War, 1756 to 1763, which drained the treasury. Famines, heavy taxes, and social inequalities worsened the plight of the masses. The court, with its lavish feasts at Versailles, became a symbol of decadence and indifference. Louis XV, once the beloved, was increasingly seen as a weak ruler, indulging in personal pleasures while neglecting the nation's fate. In this context, tales of the Bourbon curse began to spread. The people, disillusioned with the monarchy, sought explanations for their hardships in mystical narratives. Royal deaths, scandals, and the court's decline were linked to ancient curses, perhaps from executed witches, the bitter oaths of oppressed peasants, or divine wrath. Louis XV's death, with its sheer horror, became the pinnacle of these beliefs, solidifying the idea that the Bourbons were under an invisible, malevolent force. Smallpox, Louis XV's horrifying death. In 1774, Louis XV, then 64, began to show signs of ill health. Initially, he felt fatigued and feverish, but his condition rapidly worsened. Royal physicians were summoned, and soon they confirmed a terrifying truth. The King of France had contracted smallpox, one of the deadliest diseases of the era. Smallpox spared neither rich nor poor, but in the 18th century it was particularly brutal, with high mortality rates and gruesome symptoms. Victims developed pus-filled blisters, high fevers, and their bodies gradually succumbed. Survivors often bore permanent scars. For Louis XV, smallpox was not just a physical affliction, but a symbol of the monarchy's decay. As his condition deteriorated, his body was ravaged, blisters burst, skin peeled away, and a putrid stench filled his chamber. Courtiers, no matter how loyal, could not endure the sight and smell. Many fled, leaving Louis XV in agony and solitude. Only a few physicians and devoted servants remained, haunted by the horror. Louis XV's death was more than just a medical event. It carried profound symbolic weight. To the people, it was a divine warning, a punishment for the court's extravagance and moral decay. Stories circulated that the king's rotting body signified the rot of the entire feudal regime. Some even believed the disease was the result of a curse sent by supernatural forces to end the reign of an unworthy king. Reactions of the court and the people. Louis XV's death sent shockwaves through the court and the populace. At Versailles, funeral rites were hastily arranged, not only due to fears of smallpox spreading, but also to facilitate a swift transfer of power. The throne passed to his grandson, Louis XVI, a 20-year-old unprepared for the burden of ruling a kingdom on the brink of a crisis. Yet this transition did little to quell the unrest brewing among the people. The French populace, burdened with decades of poverty and oppression, showed little grief for Louis XV. Instead, his death fueled gossip and rumors. In taverns, village markets, and dark alleys of Paris, people whispered of the Bourbon curse. Some claimed the court had angered ancient witches, executed under Louis XIV for alleged black magic. Others believed the curse stemmed from the bitter oaths of peasants, exploited to the brink of despair. More mystical tales suggested the dynasty's sins had turned divine favor against them. At court, such rumors were dismissed as superstition, but they seeped into the minds of royals and courtiers. Some began to fear that Louis XV's fate was a harbinger of greater tragedies. This unease was compounded by strange events before and after his death, such as the earlier loss of his son, Louis Ferdinand, in 1765, and scandals involving the king's mistresses. Madame de Pompadour and surrounding mysteries. A key figure in Louis XV's reign linked to curse stories was Madame de Pompadour, his renowned mistress. Jean-Antoinette Poisson, known as Madame de Pompadour, was not only a lover but a powerful advisor, influencing political and cultural decisions. Known for her intelligence, charm, and refined taste, she was also despised by many at the court and among the people for her role in the court's extravagance. She died in 1764, a decade before Louis XV, at age 42, from illness, possibly tuberculosis or a lung-related disease. Though not expected, her death sparked rumors of black magic and curses from political enemies. Some claimed she was cursed for manipulating the king and weakening the court. While baseless, these stories added to the ominous atmosphere around the Bourbon. Though not a royal by blood, her death was seen as part of the dynasty's chain of tragedies. Her passing also marked a decline in Louis XV's influence. After her death, he grew reliant on Madame du Barry, another mistress loathed for her extravagance and low birth. These relationships damaged Louis XV's reputation and reinforced the belief that the court was mired in decay, paving the way for greater tragedies. Smallpox, disease and supernatural beliefs. To grasp why Louis XV's death had such impact and was tied to a curse, we must consider smallpox's role in 18th century society. A leading cause of death, it struck all classes. However, when it afflicted a king, it took on symbolic meaning. In that era's culture, a king's health reflected the kingdom's well-being. A healthy monarch symbolized prosperity. A sick or prematurely dead king was an omen of decline. This belief was reinforced by religious and superstitious views. Many saw smallpox, with its devastating effects, as divine punishment. Louis XV's scandalous lifestyle and court intrigues led people to conclude he was being judged. The disease's horror, rotting flesh, and foul odors amplified its supernatural connotations. To the people, Louis XV's death was not just medical, but proof of a curse unfolding. Louis XV's legacy and consequences for Louis XVI. Louis XV's death was not only a personal tragedy, but a turning point for the Bourbons. The throne passed to Louis XVI, who inherited a kingdom in crisis, a depleted treasury, rampant inequality, and growing public discontent. The horror of his grandfather's death cast a long shadow, not only at the court, but among the people. Tales of the curse, though possibly imaginative, became part of collective consciousness, heightening fears about the dynasty's future. Louis XV's reign left a bitter legacy, the erosion of public trust in the monarchy. The gap between the court and the people became irreparable. Lavish feasts at Versailles while the masses starved symbolized injustice. Louis XV's gruesome death only reinforced this image. The people began to see the Bourbons not just as weak rulers, but as a cursed dynasty, destined to fall. Connecting to the curse and future prospects. As hinted in Part 1 and 2, the Bourbon curse is not just a mystical tale, but a reflection of deep societal conflicts in France. Louis XV's death, with its brutality, was seen as a harbinger of greater tragedies. Curse stories, though possibly imaginative, warned the court. Without change, the Bourbons' fate would grow darker. The next part will take us to the darkest era of the Bourbons, the reign of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, where the guillotine became a symbol of rage and the curse seemed to peak. Were these tragedies truly the result of a mystical curse, or merely the price of a dynasty's errors? Continue the journey to uncover the truth behind the House of Bourbon.
Part 4. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Blood beneath the guillotine. Continuing the tale of the Bourbon curse, Part 3 immersed us in Louis XV's gruesome death, an event that marked the monarchy's decline and solidified belief in a curse haunting the dynasty. Smallpox's horrific toll on the king's body became a symbol of not just his decay, but that of the entire French feudal system. Whispers of the curse, whether born of superstition or public fury, spread across France, casting a dark pall over the court. The throne passed to Louis XVI, Louis XV's grandson, but instead of ushering in hope, his reign with Queen Marie Antoinette became the curse's climax. This part plunges us into the darkest period of the Bourbons. When the French Revolution erupted, the guillotine became a symbol of wrath, and the curse seemed to manifest in blood-soaked deaths. The reign of Louis XVI, a kingdom on the brink. When Louis XVI ascended the throne in 1774, at age 20, France faced unprecedented challenges. The treasury was depleted from Louis XV's costly wars like the 7 Years' War and support for the American Revolution. Heavy taxes, famines, and stark inequalities eroded public faith in the monarchy. The court at Versailles, steeped in extravagance, remained detached from the people's suffering. Though well-intentioned and eager for reform, Louis XVI lacked the decisiveness and experience to navigate the crisis. Beside him was Queen Marie Antoinette, daughter of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. At 14, she was sent to France in a political marriage to cement an alliance. With her beauty, charm, and refined taste, she was initially welcomed as an emblem of elegance. However, her lavish lifestyle, penchant for extravagant parties, and rumors of affairs soon made her a target of scorn. Dubbed Madame Deficit by the people, she was blamed for France's financial woes. Infamous, though apocryphal tales of her saying, "If the people have no bread, let them eat cake," cemented her image as a callous queen. As noted in Part 3, Louis XV's death left a heavy legacy, a kingdom in disarray, and a growing belief in the Bourbon curse. Tales of divine punishment, executed witches, or peasant oaths became part of folklore. As Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette took the throne, they faced not only economic and political woes, but a populace increasingly convinced the monarchy was doomed. The tragedies awaiting them would only deepen this belief. The French Revolution's outbreak. By the late 18th century, by the late 1780s, France was in dire straits. Famine raged, bread prices soared, and public discontent reached a boiling point. Louis XVI, aware of the issues, struggled to enact effective solutions. Financial reform attempts by ministers like Turgot and Necker failed due to opposition from nobles and the court. In 1789, to address the fiscal crisis, Louis XVI summoned the Estates General, a representative body dormant for over a century. This decision inadvertently ignited the French Revolution. The Estates General became a platform for the grievances of the Third Estate, commoners, who, despite being the majority, held little power. When their reform demands were rejected, Third Estate delegates formed the National Assembly, marking the revolution's start. The storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, though symbolic, fanned the flames of revolt nationwide. Paris's masses, empowered by anger and hunger, demanded justice and radical change. In this context, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette became focal points of criticism. Versailles' opulence stood in sharp contrast to the people's misery. Marie Antoinette in particular was vilified as a symbol of decadence. Revolutionary pamphlets and prints portrayed her as the Austrian witch, a lavish and treacherous figure, plotting with foreign powers to crush the people. These accusations, largely exaggerated, made her one of history's most hated figures. The monarchy's collapse. By 1789, events spiraled out of control. In October, a mob of Paris women, enraged by bread prices and the court's indifference, marched to Versailles. They stormed the palace, forcing Louis XVI and his family to leave and relocate to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, under close watch. For the first time, the French monarchy was under the people's control. Louis XVI, attempting to cooperate with the National Assembly, lacked the resolve to regain public trust. In 1791, in a desperate bid to escape danger, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette planned to flee Paris to the border, hoping for support from royalist forces and foreign allies, particularly Austria. The plan failed when the royal family was recognized and captured at Varennes. This flight to Varennes shattered Louis XVI's credibility. The people now saw him not just as a weak king, but a traitor, willing to call on foreign armies to suppress his own subjects. By 1792, the situation worsened. France declared war on Austria and Prussia, and early military setbacks fueled fears of internal betrayal. On August 10, 1792, Parisian crowds, backed by revolutionary forces, stormed the Tuileries Palace. Louis XVI and his family were arrested and imprisoned in the Temple Tower, a fortified prison in Paris. The monarchy was officially abolished, and France became a republic. Facing the guillotine. The monarchy's fall marked the start of personal tragedies for Louis XVI's family. In 1793, Louis XVI was tried before the National Convention, the Republic's governing body. Accused of treason, conspiring against the people, and colluding with foreign powers, his fate was sealed despite his defense. On January 21, 1793, he was led to the Place des Révolutions, now Place des Concorde, and executed by guillotine. Before a crowd of tens of thousands, the guillotine's fall, ending the king's life, was not just a political act, but a symbolic moment, the end of centuries of monarchy, and a punishment seemingly ordained by fate. Louis XVI's death shocked France and Europe. To revolutionaries, it was a triumph of justice, but to others, especially those believing in the Bourbon curse, it was stark proof of divine retribution. People recalled Louis XV's gruesome death, and now his grandson met a bloody end. Curse tales, once whispers, became open discussions. Some believed the guillotine was not just a revolutionary tool, but an instrument of a supernatural force enacting a curse placed on the Bourbons centuries ago. Marie Antoinette, now a widow, faced an equally tragic fate. After her husband's death, she was held in harsh conditions at the Temple Tower, separated from her children and under strict surveillance. In 1793, she was tried by the Revolutionary Tribunal. Charges included treason, squandering the treasury, and even baseless accusations of incest with her son.
The trial was a political spectacle designed to humiliate her. Despite exhaustion and illness, Marie Antoinette maintained dignity, writing poignant farewell letters to her children and accepting her fate. On October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette was taken to the Place des Révolutions. The crowd jeered, calling her the Austrian witch and enemy of the people. In a simple white dress, her hair shorn and grayed by suffering, she ascended the scaffold with remarkable composure. The guillotine's blade fell, ending the life of one of history's most controversial figures. Her death was not just a political event, but a moment that stirred hearts. To those believing in the curse, it was another chapter in the Bourbons' tragic saga, proof that no one in the dynasty could escape their cruel fate. Curse or consequence? The deaths of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were seen as the curse's zenith. But was this truly a supernatural curse or the inevitable result of political and social failures? As discussed in Part 3, belief in the curse stemmed from the 18th century's cultural and religious context, where people explained suffering through mystical tales. The Bourbons' extravagance and detachment made them ideal targets. Yet historically, their tragedies can be explained through cause and effect. Louis XVI inherited a kingdom weakened by his predecessor's missteps. Public discontent, fueled by Enlightenment ideals, sparked an unstoppable revolution. Marie Antoinette, though not solely responsible, became a symbol of the decadence Enlaces despised. Their deaths by guillotine were not just personal punishments, but the collapse of a regime that had lost legitimacy. To the people of the time, however, the curse held greater power than historical analysis. Louis XV's horrific death planted the seed of divine punishment. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's executions during the Revolution reinforced this belief. Tales of executed witches, peasant oaths, or even curses from foreign powers like Austria, Marie Antoinette's homeland, circulated widely. Though lacking historical basis, these stories became part of the cultural legacy, amplifying the mystique of the Bourbons' tragedy. Legacy of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Their deaths marked not only the end of
Part 5, Louis XVII, the king who never ruled, and the curse continues. Following the tragic saga of the House of Bourbon, Part 4 brought us to the curse's climax, with the bloody deaths of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette under the guillotine amid the French Revolution's fury. These events not only marked the fall of absolute monarchy, but solidified the belief that the Bourbons were under a relentless curse. From Louis XV's gruesome death by smallpox, seen as the first omen, to the guillotine's fall in the Place de la Révolution, each tragedy seemed a new chapter in a tale of divine retribution. But the curse did not end there. This part delves into the heartbreaking fate of Louis XVII, the young king who never ruled, whose nameless tragedy left France shuddering. Louis XVII's story is not just another dark chapter for the Bourbons, but a testament to the curse's power, or the cruel consequences of a chaotic era. Post-revolution context: a blood-soaked France. After Louis XV's execution in January 1793 and Marie Antoinette's in October, France plunged into the chaotic reign of terror. Led by figures like Maximilien Robespierre, tens of thousands were guillotined for suspected counter-revolutionary ties. In this turmoil, the fate of the remaining royal family became a focal point. Louis Charles, the second son of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, was at the heart of political schemes, mystical tales, and the growing belief in the Bourbon curse. Born on March 27, 1885, Louis Charles was titled Duke of Normandy at birth. After his elder brother, Louis Joseph, died of tuberculosis in 1789, he became the Dauphin of France. Following Louis XV's execution, royalists in France and abroad recognize Louis Charles, then 8, as Louis XVII, the rightful king. In reality, the boy never had a chance to rule. Instead, his brief life was a series of torments, confined in harsh conditions, ending in a mysterious death that deepened tales of the curse. A short life in a dark cell. After the attack on the Tuileries Palace in August 1792, Louis Charles and his family were imprisoned in the Temple Tower, a fortified prison in Paris. Initially, the royals were treated relatively decently, but after Louis XVI's execution, conditions worsened. In the summer of 1793, Louis Charles was separated from his mother, Marie Antoinette, and sister, Marie Theresa. This move aimed to control the boy, seen as a potential threat to the Republic, and break the royal family's spirit. Louis Charles, only 8, was placed under the care of Antoine Simon, a cobbler and revolutionary official. Simon and his wife were tasked with re-educating the boy, aiming to erase royalist ideals and turn him into a Republican citizen. However, what transpired went beyond education. Louis Charles was treated cruelly, confined in a dark, filthy cell, deprived of sunlight and fresh air. His food was scarce, and he was forced to drink alcohol to weaken him physically and mentally. Some accounts suggest he was beaten and coerced into signing documents slandering his mother, including incest allegations used in her trial. Louis Charles's health deteriorated rapidly. He contracted tuberculosis, a common disease, and malnutrition and harsh conditions worsened his state. By 1994, when Simon left the Temple Tower, Louis Charles was left in near total isolation. He received no medical care, and guards rarely checked in on him. In his final months, the boy could barely speak or move, his body emaciated to a horrifying degree. On June 8, 1795, Louis Charles died in his cell at age 10. The official Republican report stated he succumbed to tuberculosis, but his death immediately sparked suspicion and rumors. To royalists, Louis XVII's death was a deliberate assassination to eliminate any hope of restoring the monarchy. To others, especially those believing in the Bourbon curse, it was the clearest proof yet that the Bourbons were doomed to tragedy. Mysteries surrounding Louis XVII's death. Louis Charles's death was not only a tragedy, but one of history's great mysteries. Soon after news of his death spread, many refused to believe the Dauphin had truly died. Some royalists claimed he was rescued and replaced with another child in the prison. Stories of Louis XVII's survival emerged, with dozens claiming to be the Dauphin in subsequent decades. Imposters like Karl Wilhelm Naundorf gained attention, but none were verified. In 2000, DNA testing advancements allowed scientists to analyze a heart believed to be Louis Charles's, secretly preserved by a physician after the 1795 autopsy. Tests confirmed it belonged to a child related to Marie Antoinette, verifying Louis Charles's death in the Temple Tower. Yet this truth did not silence the myths. To many, the tragedy of Louis XVII, an innocent child dying in agony, was final proof that the Bourbon curse spared no one, not even the youngest and purest. Louis Charles's death held a profound symbolic weight. If Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette represented the monarchy's decadence, Louis Charles was a symbol of innocence destroyed by political strife. His death in obscurity, without a funeral, and with his body hastily buried, stirred guilt even among some revolutionaries. It deepened the belief that the Bourbons were paying for their ancestors' sins, or were under a supernatural curse. The curse and social psychology. As noted in prior parts, belief in the Bourbon curse reflected not just personal tragedies, but the mood of a society in upheaval. The French Revolution upended not only the monarchy, but traditional values, fostering fear and instability. Curse tales were a way for people to make sense of events beyond their control, linking the Bourbons' tragedies to supernatural or moral causes. Louis XVII's death, in particular, had a powerful impact because it involved an innocent child. In 18th century culture, children symbolized purity and hope. The cruelty Louis Charles endured, despite his lack of guilt, led many to believe this was not merely human action, but part of a greater punishment. Curse tales, from Louis XV's gruesome death to the guillotine scenes of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, gained a new chapter, the destruction of a royal child, the dynasty's last hope. Some folklore suggested the curse stemmed from the bitter oaths of oppressed peasants. Farmers, artisans, and others, driven to despair by taxes and wars, prayed for the monarchy's downfall, and Louis Charles's death was seen as part of this retribution. Others tied the curse to earlier events, like the persecution of witches under Louis XIV, or Louis XV's extravagance, believed to have angered divine or mystical forces. Louis XVII's legacy and the Bourbons. Louis XVII's death marked the end of Louis XVI's direct line. His sister, Marie Theresa, was the only immediate royal family member to survive the revolution. Released in 1795, she lived in exile, carrying the trauma of her family's fate. Though the monarchy was briefly restored in 1814 under Louis XVIII, Louis XVI's brother, the Bourbons never regained their former glory. The tragedies of Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and Louis XVII left an indelible scar on the dynasty's history. Louis XVII's story inspired literature, art, and historical debates. Impostors claiming to be the Dauphin fueled romantic tales of survival and restoration. Yet Louis Charles's tragedy is a reminder of the cost of political conflict and an era's cruelty. It also cemented the Bourbons' image as a cursed dynasty, with each generation facing new sorrows. Connecting to the curse and outlook. As hinted in prior parts, the Bourbon curse is both a mystical narrative and a reflection of France's societal tensions. Louis XV's death was the first omen. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's executions symbolized public rage. Louis XVII's, an innocent child in a cell, proved the curse, if real, spared no one, regardless of age or guilt. It seemed an unstoppable force, intent on erasing the Bourbons from history. The next part will explore other strange deaths in the dynasty, from the assassination of the Duke of Berry to the end of the legitimate line. These events will further illuminate the question, was the Bourbon curse real or merely the consequence of historical errors and a dynasty's decline? Continue the journey to uncover the truth behind one of Europe's most powerful families.
Part 6. Other Strange Deaths in the House of Bourbon. Continuing the tragic tale of the Bourbon curse, Part 5 delved into the heartbreaking fate of Louis XVII, the young king who never ruled, dying in a prison cell at age 10. His death, ravaged by illness and revolutionary cruelty, was not only another dark chapter, but solidified the belief that the Bourbons were under an unforgiving curse. From Louis XV's gruesome death by smallpox, the guillotine's toll on Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, to Louis XVII's nameless tragedy, each event seemed a piece of a grim puzzle about a once glorious dynasty's fate. Yet, if the curse was real, it did not stop there. This part explores other strange and sudden deaths in the Bourbon line, from the assassination of the Duke of Berry to the end of the legitimate line with Henri, Count of Chambord. These events, set against a changing historical landscape, continue to raise the question, were the Bourbons truly cursed or merely victims of their era's brutal upheavals? Post-revolution context, the Bourbons in exile. After Louis XVI's death in 1795, the House of Bourbon descended into chaos. The monarchy was toppled, and surviving royals lived in exile across Europe, in Austria, Spain, and England. Marie-Thérèse, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's eldest daughter, was the only immediate family member to survive the revolution. She carried her family's trauma and became a symbol of hope for royalists. But the Bourbons' fate remained shrouded in darkness. In 1814, after Napoleon's fall, the monarchy was briefly restored under Louis XVIII, Louis XVI's brother.
However, this restoration period was unstable, marked by divisions between royalists and those favoring revolutionary ideals. The Bourbons, though back on the throne, never regained their former authority. The tragedies of Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and Louis XVII haunted public memory, and curse tales persisted, fueled by sudden and strange deaths in the dynasty. The assassination of the Duke of Berry, a dagger in the night. One of the most tragic events of the Restoration was the assassination of Charles Ferdinand d'Artois, Duke of Berry, in 1820. The Duke, second son of Charles X, brother of Louis XVI and Louis XVIII, was a direct heir to the throne. With his charismatic nature and staunch support for monarchy, he was seen as a hope to bolster Bourbon power in a divided France. On the evening of February 13, 1820, the Duke left the Paris Opera House with his wife, Maria Carolina of Naples. As he stepped toward his carriage, a man named Louis-Pierre Louvel, a saddler with anti-royalist views, rushed forward and stabbed him with a dagger. The blade pierced his chest, causing a mortal wound. The Duke was carried back to the Opera House, where doctors tried to save him, but the injury was too severe. He died the next morning, in pain and surrounded by family. The Duke's death stunned France and Europe. It was the first time since Henry IV in 1610 that a senior Bourbon was publicly assassinated on the streets of Paris. To royalists, his death was a crushing blow to hopes of restoring the monarchy. Louvel, during his trial, declared he acted out of hatred for the Bourbons, whom he blamed for the people's suffering. His act was not just personal, but a symbol of lingering revolutionary rage. The Duke's death reignited debates about the Bourbon curse. People linked it to earlier tragedies: Henry IV's assassination, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's executions, and Louis XVII's prison death. To many, it was not just the act of a fanatic, but another chapter in a divine punishment saga. Some folklore even suggested Louvel was manipulated by a supernatural force, though no historical evidence supports this. Yet the assassination brought a glimmer of hope for the Bourbons. At the time of his stabbing, his wife Maria Carolina was pregnant. 7 months later, she gave birth to a son, Henri, later known as the Count of Chambord. Dubbed the Miracle Child by royalists, he was the last direct heir of the Bourbon main line. However, as we will see, Henri's fate was not free from the curse's shadow. Henri, Count of Chambord, the end of the legitimate line. Henri d'Artois, Count of Chambord, born in 1820, was seen as the final hope for the Bourbon main line. After his father's assassination, Henri was raised under tight protection, mostly abroad, due to France's political instability. In the 1840s and 1850s, he actively campaigned to restore the monarchy, but these efforts failed due to divisions among royalists and the rise of republican and imperial ideals under Napoleon III. In 1870, after Napoleon III's Second Empire collapsed, a new opportunity arose for the Bourbons. France became the Third Republic, but royalist sentiment remained strong. Henri, now the head of the main line, was offered the throne in a constitutional monarchy. However, he refused to compromise, particularly on accepting the tricolor flag of the Revolution over the traditional white Bourbon flag. This rigidity cost him his final chance to restore the monarchy. Henri died in 1883 in Austria, childless. His death marked the end of the Bourbon main line in France. While the Bourbon Orleans and branches in Spain and Italy persisted, the legitimate line from Louis XIV was extinct. Henri's death was not bloody like his predecessors, but it was no less symbolic. To those believing in the curse, his childlessness was final proof of the Bourbons' doomed fate. Other strange deaths in the Bourbons. Beyond the Duke of Berry and Henri, the Bourbons saw many sudden and mysterious deaths, adding to cursed lore. Notable examples include Louis-Philippe II, Duke of Orleans. A Bourbon branch, Louis-Philippe II, Philippe Égalité, was a controversial figure in the Revolution. Despite royal ties, he backed the revolution and even voted for Louis XVI's death. Yet this did not save him. In 1793, suspected of treason, he was guillotined. His death, though political, was seen by some as part of the curse, as even those who abandoned royal ties could not escape it. Princess de Lamballe, a close friend of Marie Antoinette, was brutally killed by a revolutionary mob. Her head was paraded before Marie Antoinette's cell. Though not a Bourbon, her death is tied to the court's tragic chain. Exiled royals. Many Bourbons who survived the revolution died unexpectedly in exile, from accidents, sudden illnesses, or mysterious suicides. These events, though poorly documented, were often attributed to the curse. These deaths across contexts reinforced the belief that the Bourbons could not escape their grim fate. Each incident, whether assassination, illness, or accident, seemed to carry a supernatural weight in contemporary eyes. Curse or historical consequence. As in prior parts, the question persists: were the Bourbons cursed or victims of history? Historically, the tragedies, from Louis XVI to Henri, can be explained by political, social, and personal factors. The revolution and subsequent conflicts created a hostile environment for the Bourbons, making them targets of violence and instability. Henri's refusal to adapt to modern governance reflected the dynasty's inability to evolve. Yet, to 18th and 19th century minds, the curse held greater sway. These deaths, seen as too coincidental, seemed supernatural. Tales of witches' curses, betrayed alliances, or divine wrath fueled the legend. The curse was less about historical fact and more about cultural expression of a people's pain and resentment. Legacy and impact. The Bourbons' strange deaths, from the Duke of Berry to Henri, left a lasting mark on French history and culture. They symbolized the shift from feudalism to modernity. The Bourbons, once emblems of absolute power, became a warning of power's fragility.
Part 7. Curse or Consequence. Unraveling the Bourbon Mystery. Continuing our exploration of the House of Bourbon's tragic fate, Part 6 examined the strange and sudden deaths of its members. From the 1820 assassination of the Duke of Berry to the 1883 death of Henri, Count of Chambord, marking the end of the legitimate line. The curse of the Bourbons fueled belief in a supernatural force haunting the dynasty. From Louis XV's gruesome smallpox death to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's guillotine executions, Louis XVII's prison demise, and later tragedies, each story seemed a thread in a dark tapestry of a dynasty's fall. The question remains: was this a supernatural curse, or the inevitable result of historical errors, extravagance, and oppression? This part delves into the origins of the curse belief, analyzes historical arguments, and explores folklore to answer one of France's most haunting mysteries. Belief in the curse, cultural and psychological context. To grasp why the Bourbon curse gripped so many, we must consider the cultural and psychological context of France from the 17th to 19th centuries. As noted earlier, this was an era where science and reason emerged, yet superstition, magic, and divine retribution dominated public consciousness. In an unequal society where peasants and artisans bore heavy taxes, famines, and wars caused by the monarchy, curse tales were a way to explain suffering and express rage. The Bourbons, with their opulent Versailles and detachment from the masses, were ideal targets for mystical narratives. Each royal tragedy, from Henri IV's 1610 assassination to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's 1793 executions, Louis XVII's prison demise, and later tragedies, each story seemed a thread in a dark tapestry of a dynasty's fall. The question remains, was this a supernatural curse or the inevitable result of historical errors, extravagance, and oppression? This part delves into the origins of the curse belief, analyzes historical arguments, and explores folklore to answer one of France's most haunting mysteries. Belief in the curse, cultural and psychological context. To grasp why the Bourbon curse gripped so many, we must consider the cultural and psychological context of France from the 17th to 19th centuries. As noted earlier, this was an era where science and reason emerged, yet superstition, magic, and divine retribution dominated public consciousness. In an unequal society where peasants and artisans bore heavy taxes, famines and wars caused by the monarchy, curse tales were a way to explain suffering and express rage. The Bourbons, with their opulent Versailles and detachment from the masses, were ideal targets for mystical narratives. Each royal tragedy, from Henri IV's 1610 assassination to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's 1793 executions, Louis XVII's prison demise, and later tragedies, each story seemed a thread in a dark tapestry of a dynasty's fall. The question remains, was this a supernatural curse or the inevitable result of historical errors, extravagance, and oppression? This part delves into the origins of the curse belief, analyzes historical arguments, and explores folklore to answer one of France's most haunting mysteries. Possible origins of the curse. Though no historical evidence supports a supernatural curse, folklore and ancient texts suggest possible origins. Here are some prevalent theories. Witch persecution under Louis XIV. In the late 17th century, France saw trials involving black magic and poisoning, notably the affair of the poisons. Many, from nobles to commoners, were accused of using poisons and rituals to harm rivals. Dozens, including suspected witches, were executed or imprisoned. Folklore claims some cursed the Bourbons, especially Louis XIV, who ordered the crackdown. The deaths of his heirs were seen as evidence. Peasant oaths. Under Bourbon rule, particularly Louis XIV and Louis XV, the masses faced heavy taxes to fund wars and court extravagance. Famine and injustice led peasants to pray or swear oaths for the monarchy's fall. In the era's mindset, these prayers held supernatural power. When tragedies struck, many believed these collective oaths were fulfilled. Betrayal of allies and religion. Some tales suggest the curse stemmed from political decisions. Louis XIV's revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, persecuting Protestants, was believed to have angered these communities, leading to curses. Failed alliances, like tensions with Austria during Marie Antoinette's time, were tied to foreign curses. Divine punishment. In a deeply Catholic society, many saw the Bourbons' tragedies as God's judgment for their decadent lifestyle. Louis XV's affairs and Marie Antoinette's extravagance were viewed as sinful. Louis XVII's innocent death complicated this, suggesting the curse targeted the entire dynasty. These theories, though unsubstantiated, became part of folklore, passed down and amplifying the Bourbons' mystique. Historical analysis. Consequence over curse. Historically, the Bourbons' tragedies need no curse to explain them. The dynasty ruled during a tumultuous era. As Europe shifted from feudalism to modernity, political errors, social inequalities, and revolutionary ideals created a hostile environment. Key factors include extravagance and detachment. From Louis XIV to Marie Antoinette, the Bourbons' lavish Versailles lifestyle contrasted with public poverty. This eroded legitimacy, making them targets during the Revolution. Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and Louis XVII's fates were direct results. Political missteps. Louis XV and Louis XVI's decisions like costly wars and failed reforms pushed France into crisis. Louis XVI's indecision during reform attempts sparked the Revolution. Political upheaval and violence. The Revolution, Reign of Terror, and Napoleon's rise made the Bourbons targets. The Duke of Berry's assassination reflected ongoing anti-royalist violence. Henry's failure to restore the monarchy showed the dynasty's inability to adapt. Medicine and disease. Deaths like Louis XV's from smallpox and Louis XVII's from tuberculosis were due to the era's poor medical knowledge. Yet these were imbued with supernatural meaning. From this perspective, the curse is a folk explanation for complex historical events. Rather than a mystical force, the Bourbons' own errors and societal shifts led to their downfall. The curse in culture and legacy. Whether real or not, the Bourbon curse is integral to France's cultural heritage. The dynasty's tragedies inspired countless works of literature, art, and film. Writers like Alexandre Dumas romanticized the era, while modern media portrays the Bourbons as fate-doomed. In folklore, the curse remains a cautionary tale about power and extravagance. Stories of witches, peasant oaths, and divine wrath persist, more for entertainment than belief. The curse's allure lies in blending history and myth, creating a tragic yet captivating narrative. The Bourbons' legacy reflects France's historical view. The Revolution, with its tragedies, marked the shift from feudalism to modernity. The Bourbons, once symbols of absolute power, became emblems of fragility before change. Connecting to previous parts and outlook. As hinted from parts 1 to 6, the Bourbon curse blends myth and reality. Louis XV's death was the first omen. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette.
Part 8. Conclusion. The Bourbon Curse, Myth or Reality. Our journey through the blood-soaked and mysterious pages of the House of Bourbon's history has taken us from the radiant glory of Louis XIV, the Sun King, to the horrific tragedies of later generations. From Louis XV's gruesome death, his body rotting from smallpox as an initial omen, to the guillotine's cold blade claiming Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette amid the French Revolution's fury. From the heartbreaking fate of Louis XVII fading in a prison cell, to the strange deaths of the Duke of Berry and the extinction of the main line with Henri, Count of Chambord, each chapter seems etched in blood and tears. Part 7 posed the ultimate question: was the Bourbon curse a supernatural punishment, or the inevitable consequence of extravagance, oppression, and historical errors? In this conclusion, we reflect on the entire journey, ponder the curse's meaning, and ask, does its shadow still linger today? Reflecting on the tragic journey. The House of Bourbon, one of Europe's mightiest dynasties, once ruled France with unmatched splendor. Henry IV, the first Bourbon king, brought stability after religious wars, but was assassinated in 1010, opening the dynasty's tragic chain. Louis XIV elevated France to its zenith, but the deaths of his son, grandson, and great-grandson planted doubts about a curse. Under Louis XV, court decadence and his smallpox death in 1774 deepened the belief that the royals faced retribution. The French Revolution, with Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's 1793 executions, marked the Bourbons' darkest era. The guillotine was not just a revolutionary tool, but a symbol of cruel fate. Louis XVII, an innocent child, died in prison in 1795, embodying the era's brutality and the dynasty's shattered hopes. Later deaths, the Duke of Berry's 1820 assassination and Henri, Count of Chambord's childless death in 1883, seemed final chapters in a centuries-long tragedy. Folklore tales of the curse, from peasant oaths to executed witches, wove into history, creating a haunting myth. To the people of the time, these tragedies were not just political, but proof of a supernatural force intent on erasing the Bourbons from history. The curse, myth or reality? The nature of the Bourbon curse is an endless debate. Historically, as analyzed in Part 7, the dynasty's tragedies need no supernatural explanation. They ruled during a turbulent shift from feudalism to modernity. Louis XIV's costly wars and revocation of the Edict of Nantes sowed discontent. Louis XV's decadence and weak rule widened the gap with the people. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette fell to an unstoppable revolutionary storm, fueled by Enlightenment ideals. Louis XVII, the Duke of Berry, and Henri's deaths reflected ongoing political and social strife post-revolution. The Reign of Terror, anti-royalist violence, and the Bourbons' failure to adapt sealed their fate. Diseases like smallpox and tuberculosis, common then, explain deaths once deemed mysterious. From this view, the curse is a folk interpretation of complex historical events. Yet the curse's power lies not in historical truth, but in cultural and psychological resonance. In a society steeped in religion and superstition, the Bourbons' tragedies, especially Louis XVII's innocent death, demanded a grander narrative. The people needed a supernatural explanation to cope with their suffering. The curse became a symbol of divine justice, a reminder that power built on injustice comes at a cost. Does the curse persist? Today, the Bourbons no longer rule France, but their legacy endures in history, literature, and popular culture. Branches in Spain and Luxembourg survive, but lack their former might. So does the Bourbon curse still haunt them, or is it a relic of the past? One view is that the curse, if real, fulfilled its purpose with the main line's end in 1883. Henri's childless death seemed to close the book on the Bourbons in France. Yet a symbolic perspective suggests the curse is a timeless warning for all power holders. Tales of Versailles' extravagance, the Revolution's cruelty, and the Bourbons' tragedies remain cautionary, highlighting the cost of injustice and detachment. In modern culture, the curse lives as a myth. Films, novels, and documentaries depict these tragedies with fascination, from Marie Antoinette's defiant march to the guillotine to Louis XVII's sorrowful fate. Folklore of witches, peasant oaths, and divine wrath, though no longer believed, retains a chilling allure. These stories remind us that history is not just events, but narratives we craft to understand ourselves. A haunting and open-ended conclusion. As twilight falls over Versailles, once a symbol of absolute power, we cannot help but wonder, what was the Bourbon curse? Was it the whispers of burned witches or the desperate prayers of the oppressed? A divine punishment, or merely the price paid when a dynasty builds glory on the blood and tears of its people? Perhaps the truth lies at the intersection of history and myth, where human tragedies are cloaked in the garb of destiny. The House of Bourbon, with all its splendor and sorrow, left an indelible legacy. They are a testament to power's fragility, the force of public rage, and humanity's ability to weave stories to face pain. The curse, real or not, echoes through time, a reminder that those who wield power must confront their own shadows. So has the Bourbon curse truly ended, or does it lurk still,
in ruined palaces, blood-stained pages of history, and tales told on moonless nights. Only time holds the answer, but as you walk beneath the shadows of ancient castles, listen closely. In the wind, you might hear the whisper of a curse that never faded into oblivion.